Hello internet users and welcome back to another video. Something that I've always loved to see a game focus on is weird and surreal imagery. There are never any set rules to these sorts of projects, so they're often a pretty interesting way to see someone unleash their imagination. With that said, it should come as no surprise to hear that I'm a fan of dream exploration games, or rather, Yume-Nikki-styled games. I talked about this iconic game before, and one of the things I mentioned was that it had a major influence on a lot of people. Yume-Nikki was about a girl that wandered her own dreams, and featured a lot of exploration and subtle storytelling. Its concepts were very open-ended, and because of its popularity, over the years there have been many creators putting their own twist on the idea. There are a lot of these Yume-Nikki games to cover, but today I'm going to be talking about one in particular, and the name of that game is Miserere. Miserere is a game by Snow Owl. I'm actually familiar with a fair amount of this developer's work. They've made quite a few short RPG Maker games that really stood out to me because of their visuals. There are so many unique and unnerving things in their projects. They have a very clear style to their surreal art, and I think it's all really cool to look at. In the case of Miserere, though, I've never gotten around to playing it until recently. Knowing that it draws inspiration from Yume-Nikki, I wanted to get more familiar with that style of game first. But this has been something that I've been planning to eventually cover for a long time now. If you're wondering what the word Miserere means, it's actually Latin for have mercy. By the way, I've tried to look up how to pronounce this properly, but I've gotten a few different answers, so for this video I'm gonna keep calling it Miserere because I think that's how you say it, and it also rolls off the tongue pretty easily that way too. But enough about the title, let's actually go over what it's about. You play as the lone resident of an isolated space station. The nameless protagonist has been here for about 12 years with nothing to do, and just passes the time by sleeping. However, they've recently found that their dreams are becoming difficult to control, and this is where things start. You have the option to wander around the small station and examine things for a bit of backstory, but you really can't do anything until you go to the bedroom to sleep. Like Yume-Nikki, when you first enter the Dreamworld, you're presented with a small hub area known as the Nexus. There are 4 doors here that each lead to a bizarre-looking world, which also contain paths that lead to even more worlds. Your goal in these worlds is intentionally left unclear. Usually the main purpose of these kind of games is to just wander, and appreciate the different visuals and music. It's like going through a really unique museum, where every exhibit has no correct way to interpret the meaning and emotions behind it. You're given a look at the protagonist's mind, and are left to think about what these dreams say about them. Now, so far, I've mentioned Yume-Nikki a few times. Its impact on Miserere is pretty clear, but I think that there are a lot of things here that make it stand out on its own. This isn't just the same idea with different worlds, so let's talk more about that. Although Miserere is mainly about exploration, compared to Yume-Nikki, I think it adds a lot more adventure game elements. The protagonist isn't silent and will often give dialogue when you interact with things. There are also a handful of NPCs with a few lines too. As well, there are a few points where you need to collect items, and use them to go further into certain areas. You can also find a few puzzles here and there, which some of the items are locked behind. None of these were very hard, but I appreciate their inclusion. When it comes to using these items though, it's not very straightforward what you're supposed to do with them. In one area, I got a crystal skull for completing this puzzle. I had no idea what to do with this until I eventually found that this creature in the gallery world wanted it. In exchange, he gives you a key, which you can use to unlock one of the paintings that takes you to this eerie indoor area. There are some items that only lead to dead ends though, with the reward being an interesting visual. However, there is actually a way to quote-unquote complete the dream world when you find the correct items. I'll talk more about that later, but for now, I wanted to go over some of the ways that Miserere handles its worlds. All of these areas can look wildly different from each other, but generally most of them are pretty dark, and you're not going to find a lot of bright colors. Like with some of Snow Owl's other games, I've noticed that there is a lot of these Silent Hill-esque locations, where there's a heavy amount of rust and decay with some creepy atmosphere. Some dreams have a unique feel to them, and are pretty memorable. One of my favorite places in the whole game is the Hallway of Statues. Here you'll find a bunch of statues lined up, each with a different expression. There are also these weird-looking creatures you can talk to. The sights and sounds here make this feel pretty mysterious and relaxing. It's hard to explain without you playing it for yourself, but I just thought this place was really interesting to go through. Another neat dream was the theater. It's pretty small, but has a screen here that's really hard to forget once you see it. You can walk out onto the stage and see a bunch of creatures sitting in the audience. Here, and only here, the protagonist is able to take a little bow when you press the interact button. There are definitely a lot of cool things to see as you look around, but given the nature of these sorts of games, it's hard to explain what it is I like about every little thing. The excitement of not knowing what you'll find next makes exploring really enjoyable. Something that I also like about Miserere is that the maps here are pretty straightforward to navigate. Even though there can often be multiple paths to take, there are a lot of corridor-like sections, with many landmarks along the way. It's not too hard to retrace your steps if you get lost. I'm actually really glad that the exploration is set up the way it is, because it fixes a problem that I had with Yume Nikki. In that game, there were several huge open areas, where you could keep going in a single direction until the map started to loop. It often became a chore to find anything of interest, and they were easily one of my least favorite things about the game. Another convenience that Miserere adds is the ability to unlock shortcuts. There are only a couple of them, but when activated, they become a permanent portal you can access from the Nexus. If you do find yourself stuck somewhere though, one option that you'll always have is to wake yourself up. You can do this at any point by going into the inventory menu. In pretty much every dream exploration game, you can use this as a quick way to return to the start of the dream world. There are also a few times where this is mandatory in order to escape certain areas. If you were wondering, there aren't any major threats in this game. By that, I mean that there isn't any way to get a game over. There are some rare moments where things in the dreams can attack you, but all that happens is that you'll be woken up. Moving on, I now want to talk about some of the things hidden throughout Miserere, and how to reach its ending. Like I said, there are a bunch of items you can collect along the way. Not all of these are required to progress, but you can cause some strange things to happen with a few of them. In one area you can find a cross. If you take this to the back area of the theater, you can use it to destroy this frog creature. Once this is done, the next time you wake up, the protagonist will see something appear in the main room. After questioning what they saw, they'll stumble across the entrance to a room in the station that they had forgotten about. There's not much to do here, but there are some books about folklore on the shelf you can examine. I'm pretty sure that these are meant to hint about some of the things that the protagonist dreams about. I have to say, I really wish that there were more things that you could find that would affect the station. Most of the rooms here serve no purpose. I was really hoping to come across more things in the dream worlds that cause something to happen. It feels like a really big missed opportunity if you ask me. Another secret that you can find is probably the most unsettling moment of the whole game. To find it, you first need to reach the Snowy Mountain world. Once you enter a cave there, you have to fall down a bunch of these one-way ice slides. At the very end of the cave, past a bunch of meat on the ground, you find the lair of a Yeti. You're trapped in this room, but before you wake up, you need to pick up an icicle. Once you go back to sleep, you need to reach this single-screen area. On the left side, you can find a fruit that can be obtained using the icicle. Next, go all the way back to the hallway of the statues. At the very end, on the right side, there is a headless one with a hole. When you put the fruit there, a door opens up. As soon as you enter this room, the relaxing music suddenly cuts to this eerie and unwelcoming tune. Inside, there is a new statue with a creepy smile, and on the back wall, you can see text that says, "More sacrifices." There isn't anything else here, it's just this really uncomfortable room. I'd already passed by this hall a few times, and I had the impression of it being a pretty uplifting place. The statues were odd but fun to look at, and the NPCs here even had some positive messages to say. If any place in the dream world felt safe, it was here. So it really caught me off guard to find this room waiting for me once I found a few items. I'm sure the contrast is intentional, and there's gotta be several ways that you could interpret a meaning here, but it's definitely a moment in the game that stood out to me. Before we move on, there is also just one small peculiar thing I want to mention. In this one screen here, if you look up, you can see this really out-of-place Castlevania reference. There's a big upside-down castle in the sky, and you can see some enemies flying around. Specifically, those sprites are from Harmony of Dissonance. This is kind of cool, but the GBA monsters really stick out like a sore thumb, and it just doesn't look right to me. Anyways, let's finally talk about the ending. So during your travels in the dream worlds, you find this old lady that blocks a path here. In order to get her to move, you have to find several parts of a doll and build her a friend. It is not clear at all, but gathering the doll parts is your ultimate goal during exploration. Once she's gone, you can move forward into this dark hallway. A scene will then play out where a shadow appears, and then the protagonist is woken up. When this happens, they will say that they should change the way they sleep in order to stop the nightmares. The game doesn't tell you, but you now have access to another bed in the station. If you head to the left side, you can find a small room. If you sleep here, the protagonist will enter an entirely different dream world. Shortly into the second dream, you'll come across a girl named Carrie. It's not made clear who she is, but it's pretty apparent that the protagonist doesn't like her. Once the scene ends, you get to enter this abandoned building. This is the last part of the game, and honestly, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. The second Dreamworld is more or less an entirely different game. There is no maze of areas to explore. You're now in this contained area and get to look around like in any other adventure game. You even get a map once you're inside. You don't even have to do much in this place. If you go to the right, you can immediately get the key you need and leave. But if you choose to explore, you can solve a puzzle which gives you an item that's necessary for something in the first Dreamworld. More on that in a bit, but for now, I really need to talk about the amount of story that the game dumps on you in the last 10 minutes. On the right side of the building, you can find a hole to a sewer. When the protagonist sees this, they will suddenly talk about how they used to live in a sewer with their mother before she died. They will then have a bit of a panic as they struggle to remember their mother's face. Then when you leave here, you'll get the key you need for outside of the building. Once used, you'll enter a sewer. Shortly into this, you'll find a room that has a bunch of documents, which piece the protagonist's backstory together for you. There is news about how Earth has been invaded by aliens for a long time now. Half-human, half-alien hybrids are known to be living in the sewers, and this group of exterminators makes it their goal to rid the planet of them. There is also a poster of Carrie, which says she is one of the group's top exterminators. Then when you go outside, you have this scene where Carrie appears and says she is the one who killed the protagonist's mother. She then transforms into a nightmarish creature, and then you have to do a boss battle by dodging her and using these, whatever they are, to attack her when she pokes her head out of the tunnels. Once defeated, the protagonist will wonder if this is the end of their nightmares. With their inner demons taken care of, they can go back to a happy life alone at the station. And then the game just ends. All of this information you're given is so sudden and feels random. This is what I meant when I said the last part felt like a whole other game. It doesn't feel like there was any build-up to any of this. It just kinda happens all at once, and you're left to wonder if you accidentally skipped something earlier. I did mention that there was an extra item you could use in the first Dreamworld, but it doesn't really help here. If you take the item from the office building all the way back to this cauldron, you can unlock a scene where the protagonist remembers when they first left Earth. Maybe if you could access this scene earlier in the game, it might have helped build up to the ending, but you're not able to see this until you're right at the end anyway. I also can't help but now question, how exactly did the protagonist go from living in the sewers to living alone in a space station? We're not really given an explanation on that either. I kind of get what this ending is going for, but I don't really like the execution. I feel like there should have been more hints or foreshadowing in the main Dreamworld, but everything happens so fast at the end, and it just kind of feels like a clumsy way to wrap up the story. The only thing I can think of that sorta gives a hint is when you examine a picture of a rat in this one hallway. They'll mention that they don't like them very much, which I guess you can say is a reference to their time living in the sewer? But even that's not very much. Overall, though, I do think Miserere is a fun game. If you like surreal visuals or Yume-Nikki-like games, then it's definitely worth checking out. There are a lot of interesting things to see, and Snow Owl's style also makes it feel really unique. However, I do think it could have handled some things better. The entire space station feels like a wasted concept. I was hoping that all of these areas would be used for something later, but they're not. This setting had so much potential, but the game never does much with it. Miserere also ended up being much shorter than what I was expecting. I managed to see everything it had to offer in about 2 hours. I think this game would have benefited from having some more puzzles and hidden scenes to unlock. But don't get me wrong, even though I'm saying some negative things now, I do think that Miserere succeeds at its main goal. The game does a great job of capturing the magic of dreams. A lot of what I said in my Yume-Nikki video applies here too. If you go into this wanting an adventure game, you'll probably find this a bit underwhelming. But if you're part of the niche audience that's looking for more dreams to wander through, you'll probably really like it. My name is Pikasprey, and thanks for watching.